Today's class is going to focus on historically black colleges and black organizations that were trying to change the circumstances for African Americans in the early 1900s. At the end of this class, you want to be able to define these terms here, as well as analyze the sources using the worksheet for primary source documents. And we are going to spend some time looking at the Library of Congress database to see which kind of sources we could find based on today's class. To recap where we were last class, we looked at black newspapers, we looked at the establishment of churches, the success of Madam C.J. Walker, the first African American bank, we looked at the Free African Society, cemeteries, as well as free schools that were trying to deal with the practice of segregation to try to create some sort of sense of community within the black community. For this assignment, we are going to go to the Library of Congress website, and we are going to search Negro Press, and we should come up with a series of images that look like this. Sometimes when you click the image here, you then can find 4 images, and sometimes you only just find one. Kind of depends on the link when you click on it. To verify your work, we are going to use a Google slideshow. Everybody has the ability to edit this slideshow. There are 2 sections. Section 1 is to look at the newspapers. Section 2 is to look at HBCUs. Every student is going to use one slide, as mentioned here, slide 1, and you are going to place the image here and then be able to come up to the front of the class and explain why you select the image and anything unique. If you want additional guidelines, these are things you should think about here. Any story of interest, type of stories reported, and think about these questions that are outlined here. Are the sources evidence of 2 Americas? Question 2, are African Americans better off with separate institutions? After we're done presenting, we are then going to look at historically black colleges. Remember, all of the yellow highlighted items are terms that you should be familiar with. Wilberforce University, and what you're starting to see is that African Americans are starting to establish colleges and other institutions, which was an issue that we addressed last class. However, with the issue of colleges, you have to look at the Second Moral Act. And here we have the text of that particular act. And I've already addressed the 2 sections here. And what's going to happen is we're going to be looking at the federal government distributing funds to states to fund colleges. But there are some conditions, and those conditions are outlined here. For example, they do bring up the issue of race, and with regard to race, you are not allowed to receive federal money. This federal money will be denied if you are going to base admission on race. That is what it's saying down here. However, you can receive federal government money if you establish separate schools. So if you want to establish separate schools, that's fine. The only issue they have is if you are going to have schools that are going to base admission on race. And all of these issues are outlined in this section right here. Historic black colleges provide these particular benefits from the late 1800s into the 1900s. And we see some of the education, whereas when we look at here, we're looking at the liberal arts education versus the vocational industrial, which basically is the use of hands, skill training. And it kind of reminds me of the difference between Booker T. Washington as well as W.E.B. Du Bois, which we looked at in prior classes, where Du Bois was talking about the significance of book learning, which will help elevate the status of African Americans, whereas Booker T. Washington was concerned about the training of hands. Then transition to 2 more terms, Black Greek letter organizations. I did a search for current organizations. This is what has come up. And the Fisk Jubilee Singers, as it mentions here, student choir at Fisk University, introducing religious and musical tradition of African American spirituals. So all of these organizations, skills, and questions are being addressed at the HBCUs, which is the significance of those particular educational institutions. The next series of images that we're going to look at represent items that are in the AP framework. this particular image right here. We'll watch this clip that will provide a brief introduction into the Jubilee Singers. Another required image, George Washington Carver with students. Here he is right here. Additional evidence of African American success in colleges. This one is from 1964. And here we have Professor Gail Hansberry, North Carolina University, for the year 1965. We're going to move on to search number 2. Search number 2 is going to look at the historical black colleges, and we're going to use the same slideshow from Google, and this time we're going to move on to this section right here. Section 1 should already have been completed, where we looked at the newspapers. We should see a series of images from the student searches. And now we're going to move on to the next section. Keep in mind, I did change the questions and things that you should look for. This time, for the second source, we're going to go back to the Library of Congress website, and we are going to search some of the terms: black colleges, HBCU, Professor Gail Hansberry, and so on. And we want to do the same thing. We're going to report what we find as we place those images into the slideshow. At the end of the presentations, you want to check out the terms for this particular class. Make sure you have the source framework filled out. And if you want to verify your definitions, you can use this slide.